It was just another morning in the Jefferson County Courthouse, marble floors echoing the sounds of polished shoes, whispered motions passed between lawyers, and the quiet rhythm of justice moving forward. Judge Helena Morrison, one of the most respected federal judges in New York, arrived like she did every day, quietly, professionally, and with a dignity earned through decades of fighting, not only for her position, but for her very right to be heard. A black woman in a seat that many thought she'd never reach. Her presence was more than legal authority, it was symbolic. Today's docket was loaded, but it wasn't the cases that had everyone tense. It was the arrival of Officer Bradley Renz, a white cop known as much for his short temper and record of aggressive arrests as he was for his well-connected family in law enforcement. He had been brought to testify in a case where he allegedly used excessive force during a traffic stop involving a young black teenager. The courtroom was packed. Civil rights advocates sat shoulder to shoulder with skeptics and media. Helena looked at Officer Renz as he entered the witness stand, his jaw tight, eyes narrowed, and body language screaming resentment. Not at the case, but at her. Helena could sense it. Years on the bench had taught her the different kinds of silence people carry, the heavy silence of guilt, the sharp silence of grief, and the bitter silence of hate. This one was the last. As the trial proceeded, Judge Helena maintained the calm, commanding presence she had perfected over years of sitting on that bench. Her voice was steady, her questions sharp, yet fair. But Officer Renz wasn't having it. His responses were clipped, his tone increasingly defiant. The courtroom could feel the tension crackling like static in the air. When Helena questioned the inconsistencies in his written report, specifically the missing body cam footage and the hospital reports that showed bruises inconsistent with his claims, Renz's face reddened. He leaned forward and muttered something under his breath. She heard it. So did the stenographer. "What was that, Officer Renz?" she asked, her voice still neutral. "I said," he growled, rising from his seat without being dismissed, "I don't take lectures from people like you." The courtroom froze. The words hung in the air, heavy and racial. The gasps were audible. Helena kept her poise. "Return to your seat, Officer Renz," she said, giving him a chance, one last opportunity to show restraint. But instead, he did something unthinkable. As he approached the bench, likely to intimidate or confront her, he slammed his palm down in frustration. The gavel rolled off the desk. She stood, calmly, reaching to retrieve it. That's when he did it. A quick, open-handed slap across the face of a federal judge. There was a moment of impossible stillness, the kind of moment that rewrites everyone's memory of a day. His own partner screamed his name in disbelief. Helena didn't move. She stood still, staring ahead, as blood rushed to her cheek and 100 cameras captured the moment that would shake the country. The footage of the slap spread across social media like wildfire. Within an hour, hashtags like #JudgeHelena, #JusticeForTheJudge, and #BlackWomenInPower trended worldwide. But Helena didn't flinch in front of the cameras. Instead, she quietly recessed the court, requested the officer be remanded without bail for assaulting a federal official, and retreated to her chambers alone. Inside, she stared at the mirror in the private washroom. The red mark on her cheek had already begun to swell. But the pain wasn't physical. It was deeper. This wasn't just about her. It was about what that slap represented. Every assumption that black women didn't belong where power was held. Every time her authority had been quietly questioned. Every whispered affirmative action judge comment behind closed doors. She took a breath, wiped her cheek with a cold cloth, and returned to her office, not as a victim, but as a symbol. Meanwhile, the public outcry was fierce. Activists flooded the courthouse steps, News anchors debated the implications. The Department of Justice announced a full investigation. And quietly, Officer Renz was charged not only with assault, but also obstruction of justice, abuse of power, and hate crimes. His previous cases were reopened one by one. The slap had pulled a thread that unraveled years of misconduct. Helena, however, refused to be defined by it. When she returned to the bench a week later, she did not mention the incident in her opening statement. She simply resumed court as if nothing had happened, her chin held high. But the atmosphere had changed. Every attorney, every officer, every person in that courtroom looked at her differently. Not with pity, but with profound respect. Then something unexpected happened. A young woman, nervous, eyes filled with admiration, approached her after court one day. "Ma'am," she whispered, "I used to be afraid to go to law school. Thought people like me didn't belong there. But after what you endured and how you stood tall, I applied, and I got in." Helena's eyes welled with quiet pride. That was the moment she knew her dignity had done something no gavel could. It had sparked change. That evening, Judge Helena sat in her modest home, the same home she had lived in for 27 years, surrounded by framed memories of her journey. A childhood photo from Birmingham, Alabama, where her mother once marched with Dr. King. Her law school graduation at Howard University. A grainy newspaper clipping of her swearing-in ceremony as the youngest black female federal judge in the state. The slap hadn't broken her. It had revealed the strength she had always carried. Across town, Officer Renz sat in a jail cell. His lawyers had withdrawn after the public backlash. The smug confidence he once carried was gone, replaced with quiet confusion. He had been trained to enforce the law but not to respect it, when it stood in a body he'd been taught to overlook. For the first time he was forced to reckon with what he saw and failed to see, when he looked at Helena not as a judge, but as a black woman. The media frenzy didn't stop. News segments debated the broader issue. Systemic disrespect toward black professionals, especially women in authority. Former judges, civil rights leaders, and even international voices weighed in. The story wasn't about a slap anymore. It had become a national conversation about how power and prejudice clash in the spaces where justice should live. Then came the televised court hearing, Renz's arraignment. Helena, though personally affected, did not preside. Another judge, stern and unflinching, oversaw the case. As Helena walked through the courthouse that morning, silence followed her. Not from fear, but reverence. She was no longer just a judge. She was a symbol. During the proceedings, the prosecution revealed more than anyone expected. Years of internal complaints against Renz, body cam footage of abusive behavior, and evidence that he had targeted people of color disproportionately in his arrests. What shocked the public most was that nothing had been done, until Helena was the one he targeted. That moment became a reckoning not just for Renz, but for the department, the city, and beyond. A week later, a letter arrived at Helena's office. It was handwritten, shaky, and unsigned. But the words cut deep. "I was raised to see you as less than me. I never questioned it. But when I saw you keep your dignity after what that man did, I cried. I want to do better. Thank you." She folded the letter and placed it inside the same drawer where she kept her first judicial oath. She didn't need to know who had sent it. What mattered was that someone had changed. 2 months after the slap that had shaken the courtroom and stirred a nation, a formal public hearing was held in the very same courtroom. This time, however, Judge Helena Daniels was not seated behind the bench. She sat in the front row, dignified as ever, while cameras flashed and whispers filled the chamber. The courtroom was packed. Activists, students, reporters, everyday citizens, all watching the final chapter of a story that had grown larger than any one person. Officer Ryan Renz stood before the judge. His uniform was replaced by a gray suit that hung loose on his thinner frame. Gone was the arrogance. His eyes avoided the public gallery, especially Helena's. His lawyer spoke, but there was no passion in the defense. Renz had already lost, not just legally, but morally, publicly, irreversibly. The judge read the charges aloud. Assault of a federal official, abuse of power, civil rights violation, and conduct unbecoming of law enforcement. The verdict: guilty on all counts. He was sentenced to 5 years in federal prison, the maximum allowed. Gasps echoed. Some wept, others clapped quietly. Helena didn't move. After court adjourned, the judge allowed Helena to speak briefly, not as a witness or a victim, but as a voice. She stepped to the center, the same place where she had once been humiliated, and spoke with the clarity of a bell. Justice isn't a job I do. It's who I am. What happened to me wasn't just personal. It was public, and it was centuries old. But today isn't about a punishment. It's about a promise. That this courtroom, this city, this nation, will not allow silence to shield injustice any longer. The room rose in applause, not loud but respectful. Even those who once doubted her stood. It was not just for her strength, but for the hope she rekindled in every soul who had ever felt unseen. Later that day, she received a call. A university in Atlanta wanted her to speak at their commencement. "Your story has moved our students," the dean said. "You've reminded them that strength doesn't always raise its voice. Sometimes it just refuses to lower its head." And so, Helena spoke. Not just in Atlanta, but in Chicago, Los Angeles, even South Africa via video link. Her message remained the same. Dignity is not given by a title or uniform. It is born through struggle, cemented through principle, and made visible by how we treat those the world tries to overlook. Meanwhile, the courthouse made changes. Mandatory training on implicit bias was instituted. Body cams became required in all security zones, and a plaque was installed outside courtroom 4B. It read, "In this room, a gavel fell, and silence broke. Justice begins with courage." Judge Helena